All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to a special Super Bowl edition of our normal daily office hours here. Andrew was kind enough to let me and Matt crash the party here today to answer some questions, talk a little bit of Super Bowl DFS strategy here. So we've got probably quite a bit to get into here. I know there were some questions that got posted ahead of time already. Our goal for this one is definitely just to make this kind of like a cram session and let you guys ask as many questions as you have. So to definitely go nuts in the chat here on YouTube or the Office Hours channel in Discord. That's really what we're trying to do here. Answer your guys' questions. Just make sure everybody is all set, ready for the big game here. So we'll go ahead and dive in and at least get the conversation started here. I know there are a couple questions already in our queue. I did just a couple like quick resources I wanted to call out as you guys are getting ready this afternoon, tonight, this weekend for your lineups there. I did like an hour-long show right at the start of the season here. I think this was for literally like opening night, maybe the first game of the season, where I talked showdown strategy, did a similar stream to this, answered a lot of questions for you guys. That's up on the YouTube channel here, pretty close to the top of the page, the ultimate guide for showdown here. And also, if you are a pro subscriber, Matt and I have done quite a few of these already for our pro audience, specifically diving deeper into some advanced concepts, some ways to use some of the pro exclusive custom metrics and things like that for showdown strategy. So that those videos are in the pro videos channel in Discord as well. So definitely check that out if you're looking to maybe take another level here with your lineups this week. But we'll go ahead. Let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to get a build going here just so we have a build to play with. We'll assume we're building for a relatively large field contest here for this weekend. Get 1,500 lineups built. And while this is going, Matt, do you want to give kind of a background on like what's actually going on here for the builder? I know, especially for people that haven't used SaberSim before, what we're doing, especially for NFL Showdown, really unique, quite a bit different than other tools out there.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, we make our projections, and pretty much everything about the app is centered around our sims. So we are simulating the game thousands of times, play by play. So we have essentially, all these different ways that the game can play out, and they're accurate game scripts because we are actually simulating, like, based on the time elapsed and each play, like how it affects the field position and score and all of that. So by default, a build with the default settings, which are kind of 0 correlation, 0 ownership, and 10 sim diversity, every single lineup is essentially the optimal from a simulation of the game. So what we get here is 1,500 different essentially sims of how the game could play out. So like, for example, in this first lineup, this is a sim where, Travis Kelce gets probably a few touchdowns, and then there's like a Eagles, passing attack. It's actually like a defense kicker thing. So this is probably like a Chiefs underperforming. Kelce's like getting all of the targets and just kind of like getting there from volume, but like really the Eagles blowing out, whatever. You can kind of like see the game script that goes into each of these lineups. But yeah, every single lineup is an optimal from one of the sims. So that's how that works. And then how we score them with SaberScore is essentially the more often a lineup does show up as the optimal. So say this specific lineup is the optimal in like 5 or 10 different sims, it'll be scored higher than lineups that are only show up in one of the sims. Once, if the tiebreaker, if it's like equal, is essentially just like projection, and I think sort of like the upside a little bit as well, but really like the main scoring for SaberScore is coming from how often those lineups are showing up as the optimal in the sims.
Gotcha. Yeah, cool. And I mean, one thing right off the bat, knowing that these are built from those play-by-play simulations, right? They're optimals for sims. I think sometimes, people will go in here and they'll start looking and kind of try to build the game script out in their head that matches that lineup. And I think that's great. Like, I think that is a good way to do a little bit of quality control. I also think, especially for Super Bowl, where the contests are going to be so big, sometimes, like, if you get a lineup like this that maybe, at first glance, you look at this lineup, that the game script might not be as intuitive for like a 1 Chief in the captain and then 5 Eagles in the flex spots. And to me, that's probably actually a good thing, right? Because if it doesn't look necessarily intuitive to you, it's not going to look intuitive to other people building by hand, using traditional optimizers, things like that. They're not going to find this lineup as easy. You might actually get an opportunity to play a lineup here that looks like it's appearing pretty frequently in our optimals. But I just don't think this is going to be a very common build path. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I mean, yeah, that's one of the things I talked about in that other video I mentioned at the start here. I think, sometimes, playing lineups with combinations of players that are a little uncommon, maybe people traditionally think of as negatively correlated, or maybe they are negatively correlated, is a good way to get different there, especially for a slate like this where the contests are so big. Right off the bat, I'm curious, what kind of quality control do either of you guys think is useful here for a slate like this? So somebody's run their build, they've got default settings. What are some things that somebody maybe could start looking at or doing in the build screen? That's a question we get a lot. Like, okay, what next? I get that these are optimals. Is there anything I can do to kind of make the quality of my lineups a little bit better, or do some pruning or anything like that? You guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of 2 ends of the spectrum with quality control, and this is going to really vary based on which contest you're playing. So like I want to start out with like the strategy here for Showdown specifically is really contest dependent.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'd say like in general, like the 2 things I'm doing is like trying to remove lineups that are extremely duplicated. And then also trying to remove lineups that are extremely unlikely to be optimal. And, at first, you might think like, well, all of these are optimals in one of the sims. So, they're all possible to be optimal, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But remember that there's millions of different ways that this game, or infinite different ways that this game could play out, and and probably like hundreds of thousands of or millions of different like lineup combinations that are possible, and a lineup that is only like going to be optimal 1 in 100,000 times might happen to show up in one of the sims, even though we run like 5,000 sims.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you might get lineups in there that are extremely unlikely, but they just happen to show up, whereas other lineups are like more likely to like be a 1 in 5,000 lineup rather than a 1 in a million lineup.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the other side of it is even if there are lineups that are very likely to be unique and possibly can be optimal, you can add some quality control of like, look, a lineup that is using 35,000 salary and doesn't play either QB, like there's not really a value in going that crazy with. Yeah, so like some of these lower lineups I think are certainly possible as an outcome. I mean, especially like this second one, it's like, oh yeah, I could see this maybe, but like you're also banking on like all of these pass catchers outscoring Kelsey, for example, right?
Right.
And that's like a risky play to take, but a possible one. So I think setting quality control on both ends of removing those lineups that are just like really unlikely, and then also removing the ones that are very obviously going to be duplicated 1,000 times to approaches. But it really depends on the contest you're playing. For like this big flagship, that's what it's like 500,000 entries.
Yeah, 470,000, I think. Yeah.
It's a lottery ticket. You could either play to try to min cash and like just kind of try to squeak out some profit if you want. I think generally like the highest EV play is just you try to get unique and you pray that like a 0.01% chance outcome happens. Obviously, like to get unique, you essentially want like a extremely unlikely outcome. So I would just like probably not do too much quality control at the bottom, just because might as well just like go for that $1 million win. But you do want to be definitely careful about like the high duplication lineups. On the other hand, if you're doing like a 1,000 or 10,000 entry contest, you can be a bit more conservative with how weird you're getting.
And one of the things that I really like to do a little bit of that quality control is take a look at this pool exposure here. So what this is this is the exposure, the percentage of lineups in your set that have a particular player in them. But the pool is how many lineups in your entire pool of lineups that we built here that have a player in them. And you can kind of start to look at this here and see how often in this 1,500 set are players showing up in the captain spot. We're getting like, some of these guys here, very low salary players showing up in maybe just one or two or just a very small percentage of the lineups. Kind of on, on the heels of what Matt was saying there, that they may actually show up, like they may be a 0.1% chance to be optimal in like objective terms, if you could even end up calculating that. Or the only two lineups that Jody Fortson is the optimal captain in, even if you had built 100,000 lineups, might be the two you have in the pool. So one thing that I actually like to do quite a bit here is just do a little bit of checking here on some of these guys, and maybe do some pruning here of removing some of these guys from my captain pool, or just double check, right? You can use this as an opportunity also to do a little bit of research and decide if you want to be on some of these plays, right? So, maybe you're looking into, I know two actual bets that I made. Actually, one bet I made, a prop bet earlier this week, is I like actually Quez Watkins over 1.5 receptions in the Super Bowl. I think like the prop betting market is a little under on him. So I might be willing to take a shot on a couple lineups with Quez Watkins captain in there, just because I like him against the market anyway. But maybe on some of these other guys, I'm doing a little bit of cleanup there. So I think that can be a useful tool. One other one I just want to shout out here, just to talk about the tools a little bit that can be useful. I think these lineup filters go a little bit underrated here, especially if you're playing, 150 lineups. You don't have a chance to spot check all of your lineups to make sure there's something that you want to play. Setting something like some kind of salary floor or something like that, and saying, I only want to show lineups that have a salary, even 45, right? It's still going to give you a ton of room to play less duplicated lineups, get a little different, but you're going to trim a lot off the bottom there of lineups that are, very, very low salary if you wanted to do a little bit of that. So.
And speaking of salary, I actually had a question that I wanted to ask you guys. So, if you look at the contest size, like we said, 470,000 for the DK flagship, but you if you go back to like any other, flagship contest during the season, usually in like the 100 to 200,000 entrance range, that's not, extra sharp money coming into the prize pools, right? It's like heavily people playing casually and things like that. How do you guys feel about ownership projections going into the weekend, like across the industry, the accuracy of ownership?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think, something I talked about, we did a show with Max and Danny earlier this week. And I think it is likely that popular names are going to maybe even get a little bit more popular here, especially at the captain spot. Obviously Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Kelsey, like they're all going to project very well, going to be very popular captains. But I think I'd even probably take maybe the over on some of these ownership projections, just because I think at times, the SaberSim ownership projections come from building these optimals, almost acting like what a rational field would do with this particular slate. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those guys get boosted up there a little bit more. I also think that, there's probably a lot of people that for the Super Bowl want to build a couple lineups, might use some random other traditional optimizer. Guys that project very well point per dollar, I think could be very popular plays here. On the Run Pure stream I did earlier this week, one of those names that I saw was Dallas Goedert here, who I think is kind of the best projected average play that's not a quarterback and also isn't one of these cheapies here. I wouldn't be surprised to see traditional optimizers just jam Dallas Goedert in a ton this week, because he's just slightly underpriced there. I think that makes sense. I do think there's a little bit like softer money coming in this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right on that. There's going to be softer money, and the people that don't usually play showdowns that now are going to be playing the Super Bowl are like either hand builders most likely, or they're just going to jam, maybe they play other DFS sports, or like I don't really know, but like they're likely either hand builders or they're using optimizers. And I think in either of those cases, it's going to be people that like use a lot of salary. Like if you're hand building a lineup and you're like, should my last spot be like, Dallas Goedert or like, I don't know, Jake Elliott or like, someone, you're just going to choose like the best player left. And that's also kind of what an optimizer does too. So I think it'll probably, I would guess it would make like the dupes more dupey. I mean, obviously there's more entries, so they're going to have more dupes, but I think even relatively, I would guess that like the really chalky, like top projected lineups, the lineups with like good players and captain, like the obvious builds, the 5-1 Chiefs on slide or 5-1 Eagles on slide. Like I don't know. I think there's going to be the obvious builds are going to be more duplicated. So there's already more value in being different because the contest is so big and top heavy. But I think the casual nature of this contest is going to make that even more so. So I would say more than usual being different, even if it's just a little bit different, is going to have a lot more value.
And
go ahead, Andrew.
Into this question, just kind of along the lines of that, I think from like an exploitative strategy, I am very interested in using either like lineup filters to play lower. Like I know we talked about salary floor. I'm really interested in like a salary cap as far as like what Matt was saying. Somebody has like 2,000 salary left. They're probably going to use the higher range of it. So I think it is probably in your benefit from a duplication standpoint to play like lineups under 49,000 salary, like leave some salary on the table, especially this week. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the salary makes a lot of sense. And I think sort of like what Max and Danny were saying with the prop betting, I do think a lot of the same lessons kind of apply, where like go the opposite of what like the casual money is going to do. And so I think one thing is that I just kind of thought of now is like, I'm guessing that defenses are going to be way under-owned because like who wants to, like, first of all, they're going to be low projected because it's a high total game with like two powerhouse offenses. Right. And then also like casual people don't want to play. You don't want to play defense in the Super Bowl because then it's like, if you're just like playing for fun, you're going to pick like the top offensive players. And so I would guess that like, because of those factors, like defenses are going to be way under-owned, and like those kinds of builds where it's like you're building a low scoring game script lineup are going to be way underplayed. So yeah, I think salary
defense, double kicker. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Worst Super Bowl of all time.
Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things I did on the Run Pure stream with our partners over there yesterday is we explored messing with these team totals a little bit here. I think it could be useful for research. So what we were doing is basically we were playing kind of like an over script where this game goes over and just exploring what some of the builds look like in an over script. I'm not going to repeat all of this here because, again, that's up on their YouTube channel. You guys can check that out. But building lineups on this setting here and exploring what some of those lineups look like. And then also playing a bit of an underscript, maybe where you get kind of like a lower scoring affair here. And one of the really interesting things I found there is you can kind of watch what the ownership of each lineup looks like as you're playing these different scripts. And when the game goes over, it doesn't tend to build you a particularly unique build path. You get a lot of the same guys that are going to be popular just in lineups built on average projections. You're getting Mahomes, Hurts, Kelsey, AJ Brown, these guys in here. But when you start playing an underscript, you really start to see some interesting names pop up. It makes some other pass catchers a little bit more viable. It brings the defenses into play. It brings the running backs into play. And that was one of the more interesting things we did on that stream yesterday, just exploring how changing the game script changes the construction of those lineups. And I think you're totally right. I think that under script where you're talking about a lower scoring game is not going to be a really popular path this week. And you can kind of experiment with that in the app there. So.
And just to build on that, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but like my understanding is, if you change the team totals, what we're going to do is we're going to discount sims. Like, let's say we're trying to play an underscript. We're going to discount high scoring sims until the new mean team totals reach whatever you've set or have gotten close to that. So if you are somebody who, like wants to build like, oh, I think it's going to be a blowout this way or that way for whatever reason, right? I think changing team totals can get you a lot closer to those game scripts that you want. So I think that can be really advantageous in showdown formats.
Yeah, no, definitely. I want to get into some questions here, answer some of these here. This one, kind of a long question here, kind of almost just a thought, and it dovetails nicely off what we were talking about here. But this user said, lineup. So I'm picking this up about halfway. But for example, a lineup you expect to be duplicated maybe 100 times in the standard flagship might come in duped 500 times in one of these massive tournaments this weekend. Whereas a lineup that you're expected to be duped 10 times might only be duped 15 times. And they were curious if anybody's actually looked at this anecdotally or with actual data for the past Super Bowls or Thursday night week 1 games. And I don't have data to back this up, but definitely kind of with what we were talking about, I think it's safe to say that like this lineup duplication isn't going to be linear. It's not necessarily as if every lineup is just going to get more duped. I think the lineups that would be likely to be heavily duped in a somewhat smaller contest are going to be exponentially higher duped in this kinds of contests. And I think doing a little bit of trimming, like Matt was talking about there, just to remove the super duped lineups from your pool, the double quarterback, max salary, very highly projected lineups will go a long way in this kind of contest.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that definitely tracks with what I was saying before. That I mean, I haven't seen the data. We could look at. I don't know if we have the contest data for previous Super Bowls, but definitely just when you think about it logically, like, you know, people that are like playing every single primetime showdown throughout the year, like, you know, though, because there's so many extra entrants this time, like those people are already playing. And so like those extra entries are people that don't usually play these contests. And so they're likely not using the same strategies. And I think it's likely that, yeah, like those really obvious lineups are going to just be like played by everyone. And the ones that are like normally might be duped 10 times, like those 10 dupes might be like a lot of sharp players that are like trying to find like a little bit of more unique lineups. And like those lineups might not, like casual people might not get to those lineups, you know, they're just getting to like the really popular ones. So I mean, we could be wrong. We'd have to look at the data to be sure, but I definitely would agree that it's likely not linear. And the highest value thing you can do is to avoid those extremely duped lineups. Also, just from a math standpoint, like you're losing so much more by playing a lineup that's duped 1,000 times than one that's duped, you know, 10. I mean, it sounds obvious, but being unique is like not the goal. It's really just like minimizing the number of duplicates. And so if every one of your lineups has like 10 duplicates, that's much better than maybe having a few like low probability uniques and then a ton that are like duped hundreds of thousands of times. So I think the goal really should be to like try to have as few of those really super duped lineups as possible.
Yeah, and I just Tavi Targaryen here just dropped this in our Discord, so I'll have to spend a little bit of time looking at this after the stream. But I think it's an interesting, looks like an analysis of like number of dupes across like how many different lineups here, comparing like the Rams Bengals Super Bowl from last year versus just a Rams 49ers Week 4 showdown earlier in the season. So I don't know. Definitely, if you guys are in our Discord, this table's posted in there. I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts there, or we can talk a little bit about that as well. But I think it's definitely interesting. Anything jumping out to you? I mean, while I've got this pulled up here, just right off the bat, I know we're all looking at this table for the first time. But anything that jumps out to you guys?
Not right off the bat. I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like, I mean, you kind of have to, I think it would be most helpful to see like the percentage of total entries. But which maybe the cumulative sum is kind of trying to get there, or the delta. I guess the delta is sort of trying to do that.
Yeah. But, I mean, it does a little, like 13% of the entries in the Super Bowl were lineups duped 500 plus times.
Got it. Okay.
Whereas in the this week 4 showdown, only 5% of the lineups were duped that many times. So like I think that kind of adjusts for contest size there, where disproportionately more lineups getting like super duped, as I would describe it in the Super Bowl there.
I think oh, go ahead, Matt. No, I was just gonna say I think that if you look at like greater than 10 to like greater than 5, like that bracket, it's about twice as duped in the Super Bowl compared to like a week 4 showdown. But then once you get above 25, it's like kind of proportional with the number of entries to the contest, closer to like 3 times as much. So even some of those more unique lineups, still going to be a little bit harder to stay at those low dupe numbers.
Yeah.
Were you gonna add something there, Matt?
I
can pull that back up.
Yeah, honestly, I don't remember what I was gonna say, but yeah, that sounds right.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, so let's keep it rolling here. One other question that we had gotten, and I think this is an interesting one. Bounce over to FanDuel here. Fortunately, we've got our resident FanDuel expert on the show here today in Matt. There was a question from somebody else about FanDuel specifically. So since FanDuel doesn't change up salary for the MVP spot, what's your guys' strategy or take to get different for Super Bowl contests there without losing too much EV? I think it's interesting, right? I mean, it's not only just the lack of salary change for the MVP spot, right? Which the effect of that is it's going to push more of the best lineups to using high salary popular players at that MVP spot. It's also a 5-player roster instead of 6, right? I mean, that lowers the amount of combinations you can make just from there. Any thoughts, on FanDuel specifically, Matt? I know you've been playing a lot there. That like ways that you can protect against duplication without sacrificing EV.
Yeah, I mean, I will be playing this big flagship. I don't know that I'm like. I think it's going to be hard to. It's a lottery. On FanDuel, like, I'm not sure if it's possible to build a plus EV unique lineup on this 600,000 entry field, or maybe it is, but like the amount of times you'd have to replay that contest to actually realize that EV is probably insanely high. So I think trying to get unique is like a non-starter, or if you want to do that and just be fine like burning your money, that's good too. I think probably like the goal is for me is like avoid more than 500 dupes. Like it's because, like you said, because there's only 5 slots and there's not different salaries for MVP. It's just you can't get that crazy. So sorry, I know I'm not giving a great answer. I think the bigger edge is going to be the smaller contests, even though there's like the Millie Maker big flagship. I think that if you are playing FanDuel and actually like kind of want to be more serious about like having a profitable slate rather than just like entertainment value, I would probably stick to smaller contests and look for those contests that are like less than 100,000 or less than 50,000 entries. And kind of once you're in those, then you can still do the duplication strategy, the avoiding dupe strategy, and try to avoid like those super duped lineups. But then you're more likely to be able to get unique, or at least a handful of dupes while still having like viable plus EV lineups. I mean, we've talked about in a pro video, we talked about like my kind of foray into high stakes FanDuel single game, and I who knows if I'm actually like that profitable there, but I think that there's probably, to me, it feel like there's at least some edge, and it's just less of a lottery. So not saying everybody should play high stakes, but I think try to focus on the smaller contests if you can. If you want to just go for the milli, I think that's fine, but just realize that like you're either probably going to just be like burning money because you have to do like minuscule percentage outcomes, or you'll just have to like go for dupes and maybe hope to get a 100 do bank that makes you still quite a big sum of money. But, yeah.
I'll put my hand in the dirt here and kind of give my take on this. So I've won enough tickets for this, so I'm max entered into the flagship on FanDuel for this weekend. So I've been messing around with this a lot this week, trying to find ways that maybe you can do this. What I have found, at least kind of trying to explore this and get a little bit unique on my end, is that I think that the mistake that people are likely to make is to just get really different with the MVP spot. And I think just looking at the pool exposures here, just because these guys, again, Hurts, Mahomes, Kelsey, these guys with really high average projections, doesn't cost you any more to use them in the MVP instead of the flex. You can see, I mean, they represent like 80%-ish, 75, 80% of the MVP optimal spot. So for me, I don't think the way I'm going to be getting different is with the MVP spot. I think where there's inefficient ownership, if you're going to find any of it, is a lot of like some of the bottom range here, where there's guys that people just aren't going to click on very much. They might not, I mean, for casuals playing just for the Super Bowl, might not even recognize some of the names. And there's actually, I mean, meaningful probabilities, if you treat these as probabilities, of landing in that optimal spot a lot of times relative to what we're projecting for the ownership there. So a lot of the builds I've been exploring here for the big flagship where I'm really focusing on duplication is like a Mahomes, Hurts, or Kelsey MVP, and something about either the construction, maybe like what the stacks look like there, or some of these bottom range MVP players is kind of the way I've been getting different. Another thing I'm noticing here as well, and I think this might lead to this, is I think, at least it seems like, I don't know relative to the max salary, but it seems like the min salary for FanDuel is a little bit higher for some of these guys. It's like, I think,
yeah,
at
well,
least
it's
I think it is.
weird. Yeah, the salary structure is just so much different because DraftKings, it's like 300. You can get, $200 min salary.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of the 3,000 min salary. Yeah, no, it absolutely is higher, right? So the opportunity cost here of like choosing to play Sky Moore at 6K is a lot higher than it is to play like whatever he is on DraftKings, where like he's probably like 1,500 or something like that. So I think this is a chance or a way to make those lineups unique, is to get some exposure to some of these bottom guys on the salary.
Yeah, and I think, again, thinking about game scripts that are going to be less popular too, if you think that most people are using either optimizers or hand building and building out those like Hurts, Mahomes, QB, like I think playing defenses and kickers is probably, again, similar, like going to be a little bit more different. Obviously there's a very decent chance that the defenses are not going to be optimal, but if you want to play for those scenarios, it's a lot easier to have like viable lineups that are below the salary cap, more likely to be unique without being super weird. So I'll probably be doing that like with my own stuff, even in like the smaller field contests. Is I'm already seeing like a Eagles D, Jake Elliott, like the Eagles kicker, lineup as like a top rated one, and I think that probably won't be terribly popular, and pretty likely, I think, to be unique. So who knows? I mean, it's hard to predict.
I think the defense angle that you're talking about is really good for this contest, right? People want to see a high scoring game, like you said. There's injury concerns with both quarterbacks. Nobody knows what like the true health of Mahomes' ankle and Hurts' shoulder is. So pretty interesting there, Matt. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just saw the comment that came in from WeZoom. This is, so we're not going to have this like for the Super Bowl, but that is actually something that we've talked about doing, not necessarily the score, but like to show the actual fantasy points that are like used in the lineup generation. I think that would be a really interesting thing to see, if like, okay, like these were the actual fantasy points that were used in like the calculation of this lineup, to see like what led to this lineup being optimal, so anyway, that is, I just am confirming that I agree that that would be a cool score or a cool idea. Showing the team score would be cool too. That probably is a little bit trickier to do, but I do like the idea of kind of surfacing more of that information of like what those sims look like that are generating them.
Yeah, and this was an interesting question as well. This came in before. Contest selection recommendations for Showdown, the same they are for classic slates, assuming you're following the profit plan. And Neil here, who asked the question, said he tends to not like the single entry and 3-max contests as much in Showdown. I mean, I'd say, for the profit plan stuff, I mentioned this, I think, even in the original video and definitely in some of our other Showdown content. This is going to be a high variance affair, right? Range of outcomes is pretty wide. I think, honestly, if you can manage and not get caught up in the hype of it being the Super Bowl and probably having some drinks earlier that morning and entering a little bit more volume in, I think if you were like playing from a pure max EV, like best practice process, I think scaling back actually makes a lot of sense. Not only just for the fact that it's a showdown, but also you're probably the largest showdown contest of the year. I think there is an argument as well to actually maybe prefer some of the single entry 3-max stuff just because the contests are going to be a little smaller. You might be able to get a little bit more viable, unique lineups in play. So if you're like me and you typically lean more towards those diversifiers, those 150 maxes, those 20 maxes, maybe an opportunity to actually get a little bit more of your action down in some smaller field, some lower entry limit type contests, just to be able to do that a little bit more. But I get caught up in the Super Bowl every year and then ultimately end up entering a little bit more than I should have. But I think if you were playing like strictly DFS profit plan adherent here, I would actually probably play a little bit less.
Yeah, it's tough because I think there's so much more casual money in like these big milli maker contests, and so they probably are like much higher EV than like a normal Monday Night Football, but it's just so high variance that it's sort of like buying a Mega Millions whatever lottery ticket when it's like, it's plus EV
mathematically EV,
ticket, but you could play for a million years and never win. So yeah.
I do think, if you did favor some of the single entries in 3-max, you might not need the optimal to win. You could probably get close and still win, and that gives you some more viable lineups to some profit. Because if you are playing these large field, you are going to probably need the optimal for the $3.20 max, the flagship, maybe even the $1.20 max, things like that.
Yeah. One other thing there is, I think we've talked about it in some of the other videos, but one thing you can try is to use 9 sim diversity if you're playing some of those smaller contests, because the way that works is it's grouping multiple sims together, but you're still getting game script lineups. And so it's kind of a way to reduce some of that variance and those really out there lineups. So you're going to be more chalky and duplicated with those settings, but if you're playing smaller contests, it can be a way to you can still run that and filter out what you think are going to be high dupe lineups, but kind of have a higher floor and not necessarily just go for the true optimal, like Andrew was saying.
Andrew, there's a question here that I'm actually very interested your take, especially talking about some of the NBA stuff we've done recently. The question says, does it make sense to adjust some projections to avoid duplication for the Super Bowl? My thought is if I have someone projected a little differently, maybe I get a little bit of a different distribution than someone else using the sim. I'm curious, you mentioned the injury concerns with the quarterbacks here heading into this game. I think the backfields are also really interesting for this game. CEH back for the first time in a little bit while. We've seen Gainwell and Boston Scott become a little bit more involved in the Eagles' rushing attack. I know looking into NBA rotations and injury reports and how teams play with different players on and off the court is a big part of your NBA process. You doing any of that for football here for this game?
So I've mostly just been consuming content around the industry, hearing what people have to say. There's, like you said, with CEH, there's a lot of uncertainty, if he plays, how much he plays. He's kind of their biggest back. Does he get goal line stuff? How much does Boston Scott play? Kenneth Gainwell's been playing a high snap share across the playoffs. I think it's okay to take a stance if you want to, if you come to a conclusion you want to play a little bit exploitatively. I would be careful in how much of an adjustment you make. I would test it out, Like maybe you think Boston Scott is going to play less, and maybe one thing I like to do is add up the total fantasy points for a position for a team, like running backs, and maybe I want to distribute it differently in an exploitative manner. So maybe I'm like, okay, for instance, maybe I think that the Eagles are actually going to play Miles Sanders much more and go with their lead back. And I could like sum that up and then maybe distribute it differently. And I don't think Boston Scott plays at all. Like that's 2.5 points almost that can go to somebody else. Like that's a big deal, right? You add 2.5 points to Miles Sanders. So I think like in an exploitative manner, if you're consuming content, doing research, and you want to make that adjustment, that's kind of how I like to do it, because I'm still like, okay, the Sims have allocated this many fantasy points to this position, so really I know I'm not getting like crazy with it.
And I know Matt, or go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a good example of sort of, you're not saying that you disagree with like the projections of the Sims. You're just sort of like, you're essentially like banking on some assumption about the game being wrong, or at least you're banking on like some specific like script being the case, right? So like you're saying, yeah, you're not necessarily sure that the running back usage is going to go this way, but you're saying like, if it is, then I want to like exploit that fact. So you can kind of do the same thing with different, I think on the prop video, you guys talked about like, okay, the Eagles passing game might be a lot, the Eagles might pass a lot more than they have been recently. And so you can like even, reduce both Eagles running backs and increase, Hurts and the wide receivers if you want to go kind of that direction, or like we were saying with defenses, like bank on a lower scoring game. You can kind of adjust the projections in a way that sort of like either you're banking on like some assumption being wrong, or you're just saying, I only want to look at this specific game script because I think it's going to be less popular. But yeah, I think Andrew's suggestion is definitely solid of looking. I mean, it's sort of similar to like the way that you've gone about NBA as well, with like kind of uncertain scenarios with rotations where you're like, okay, I want to like play as if the minutes distribution for like this, when this star player is out, is actually going to be different than the industry and SaberSim is projecting, even if it's like less than 50% chance. Like if it's a 25% chance that it turns out like, yeah, the running back share is completely different, like that's worth leaning into if it's going to be less than 25% owned. So
yeah, no, I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think one thing that can kind of help as well is looking at some of these like detailed stat projections here that we have over here on the right, and just, use them as a way to, like, you can almost treat them as the assumptions going into the sim that you're seeing here, right? Like CEH, I think, is just a very interesting situation this week where we're essentially at like a half rush attempt and a quarter of a reception right now, more or less assuming he doesn't play, right? I mean, if you could come up with his true range of outcomes, it's also accounting for the uncertainty in his playing time. His range of outcomes is clearly wider than a 99th percentile of 9.5, because there's uncertainty in what's going into this here. And especially when we're talking about, beating 470,000 other lineups on DraftKings and whatever it is on FanDuel, those are the kinds of situations that I think you can get really different than the field, because you're actually you're not just changing what you're getting out there. You're actually changing the inputs, your actual thought process of what's going in there. And I love Andrew's approach here, right, of just reallocating some of the Chiefs rushing attack volume to some of those other guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing that the sim doesn't do is injuries. So if you really, I mean, I don't generally do stuff like this, but if you're trying to get really unique and for these big flagships, like looking at if there is an injury and like who is kind of like the next, who's going to get the playing time or the fantasy points if someone gets injured, and playing for those scenarios, even if they're low probability, can be a that's one way to have that upside, but obviously high risk. Obviously Mahomes has had that like leg injury. I think he's like supposed to be full go and everything, but playing the backup Chiefs quarterback might not be a terrible strategy. I'm not going to personally do it. I'm not going to, this is not financial advice, but he's probably, I would say Mahomes is probably more likely to get injured and get replaced than maybe an average game where he's completely healthy. But that's obviously a very low probability event that you might want to not risk too much money on.
Yeah, you are certainly going to look like the time traveler in the DFS lobby if you end up shipping with a unique like Chad Henne MVP lineup on FanDuel.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question here. This one comes in sometimes. I've always kind of basically just said, be careful with this. Don't do this. But anyway, question says, I feel like many of us will be going to Super Bowl parties on Sunday, might not be able to wait until after inactives and inactives are announced, which I believe will happen an hour and a half before the game time. Final sims are run. Is there a good time Sunday morning to create lineups to take into account any news up to that point at least? Typically, when this question is coming in office hours, other streams before, I've basically always said, if you want to maximize your chance for success, you need to build lineups with the maximum amount of news, the news that other people will have when they're building their lineup. So I think waiting for those inactive sims and trying to get like your final lineups in after that is always best practice. I do think Super Bowl is like the most heavily scrutinized sporting event in the world. We probably have more news right now about kind of where things stand, about, certain injury situations and things like that, just because it's such a heavily reported on event. I would say personally, setting lineups Sunday morning and not looking to see at all any inactives in the Chiefs backfield in particular would make me a little nervous, just because I think we could get, CEH inactive and Ronald Jones active at the last second as kind of a surprise. So kind of a little bit 50-50 there. I mean, obviously you got to do what you can if you're hanging out with friends and family watching the game, but I would say best practice is to get that last final inactive sim in there.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, if you're planning on going to a party before inactives or whatever, just keep in mind, like, make note of the assumptions that you have made, that the projections are making in your builds, and then just like look at who the inactives are when they come out, and if it's anything that's like surprising. So if we're assuming that CEH is active and Ronald Jones is inactive or whatever, I mean, honestly, I've not looked at any of this stuff, but just kind of like look at what the projections are and just see, even if you don't have any of the relevant players, if there is something that changes, like that can be a source of edge. But I mean, personally, like, I'm probably not going to be at my computer like rerunning builds and stuff unless there is like major news. But I think it just sort of depends, just keep an eye on it. Certainly you should like look. And the most important thing is like get players that are out of your lineup. So like use the entry editor, look for that red lightning bolt as the bare minimum. Make sure you don't have inactive players in your lineups. And if you do that, you're at least covering like the important stuff. But yeah,
I think Jordan's approach is best practice, wait. But I mean, myself kind of in similar scenario, I'm going to have something built and then I'm going to keep my eye on news and determine if I need to rebuild. And if I do have to rebuild, I will, if I'm okay with it and I deem it not necessary. I feel like a lot of the news is kind of out already. So hopefully we don't get anything crazy close to lock.
I think it's really that Chiefs backfield and probably not even that. I could see maybe some reshuffling of some projections there and some of the final sims, maybe some more clarity on like what the roles are going to look like there. But yeah, shouldn't be any too big of surprises there for this weekend. So another question here. This is one I've talked about a lot, on the Run Pure shows. Done a lot of this in some of our other content. Do you guys do any SaberSim build types, cache, for example, for research on things such as expected chalky builds, captain usage, etc.? I'm a huge proponent of this. I actually really like doing this for research, especially, we talked a lot about avoiding duplication. Sometimes it can be hard to intuitively tell what the best way to do that is. I think, when you're building with the cache settings and your sliders are off, you're really getting an opportunity to basically see what your opponents in your contests are going to get for their lineups, unless they do other things to kind of start, adding upside or other things like that in there. Viewed through that lens, it's really like a window into what the most popular constructions are going to be. So I love running, even the top 500 cache optimals here, just getting a sense of where captain exposure is going. what types of constructions you're getting as well. I think looking to see, is a balanced build more popular here? Is a 5-1 build more popular here? I've done this pretty much all season long as a way to do some of my research for the NFL Showdown stuff. So I'll come in here, take a look again, see how captains are allocated. Sometimes I'll use this as well to double check the ownership projection as well. Like I think at Jalen Hurts, 300 salary more than Mahomes at captain on DraftKings. Given the projection difference between those two, I actually could see potentially Hurts ending up like putting some distance between himself and Mahomes at the captain spot this week. I've already done a little bit of this research here leading up to this week. I think the balanced builds are going to be really, really popular. 3-3 showing up pretty often, 4-2 a really popular construction, and specifically with those 4-2s, very balanced in between Eagles and Chiefs, right? So I think the public really thinks that this game is going to be close. That optimal lineup is likely to be a pretty balanced construction. 5-1 stacks, I think, have a possibility of being maybe a little bit underowned relative to the field here. And this is really, again, like you are literally building lineups the way you can expect a great deal of your opponents to build their lineups. So I think this kind of research can be super useful.
I think that's solid advice, Jordan. Something I haven't messed around too much with, but it makes a ton of sense from a lineup construction perspective. What is the field going to do? What are traditional optimizers going to do?
Had one other question here, and then I believe this is the last question that has been asked in either the Office Hours channel and in the YouTube chat. So obviously coming up on the hour here. So if you guys have more questions for us, fire away at us now. I did just want to address this one here real quickly. We've kind of talked about some of this, but the question was, how do we move off the average projections and play for ceiling? Is that using the 99% sorting feature? And we did kind of cover this a little bit at the start of the stream, but really I think part of what makes SaberSim so unique here is that you are moved off of the average projections by default when you build with SaberSim, right? Because you're not optimizing just purely for average projection. You are optimizing for individual sim outcomes here. So that's what Matt was talking about at the start of the stream here. These lineups, while they may or may not project well based on the average projections as well, they're actual optimals for individual play-by-play sim outcomes. So you don't really, I don't think, need to do much above and beyond that in the interest of like getting upside. A lot of that's taken care of for you there. Matt, any other like thoughts that you had kind of wanted to just add on to that point?
No, I think like using 99th percentile. Sorry, I got a phone call in the middle of that, so I didn't hear all of what you said. But I think basically like the problem with using 99th, which maybe you already explained this, is that you're going for like the high scoring outcomes.
Right.
Yeah, and so a game that's going to be low scoring where the defenses do well that's going to be a lower scoring lineup, but that doesn't mean it's less likely to win.
Yeah, and I know I'm a bit of a 99th percentile truther on classic slates, NBA, stuff like that. I will definitely be partial to SaberScore this weekend here. I would use it as my default sort if I was just kind of building here. Within my custom metric, again, a pro feature, an ability to create these custom metrics, combining different data and sorting by those. SaberScore will be kind of the upside component of that custom metric for me, just because I want to capture that probability of being the optimal lineup and that upside there. So, all right, let me see if we are seeing any other questions here coming in. We've got a couple minutes left. I would say, I don't see anything coming in here. Do you guys have a hand in the dirt take for me? A gut feeling, a stone cold lock of the game, a fade, something like that. I know we are generally pretty focused on the data here, a little more objective with a lot of our stuff. But I think for the Super Bowl will be fun. Give me a lock, a fade, something like that.
I'll go first. So I'm gonna probably take a big stand on the Chiefs running back situation. I do not like Jerick McKinnon's projection. I think it's probably too high. And I think his salary is kind of high as well. He hasn't been very effective, has seen his like rush and target share go down just with the way like Chiefs are in the playoffs like almost every year, right? So they kind of ride the hot hand in the
Mhm.
playoffs. So I think like if Hilaire is going to play, he's going to take snaps probably from McKinnon and not Isaiah Pacheco. So, and I think that just muddies both of their like usage. So I'm probably only playing Pacheco from the Chiefs backfield.
Matt, I'm gonna put your feet to the fire here too. I know this isn't your
No,
style. Give me something.
I have not done that sort of like player level research that Andrew does. That's not my style, as most of you that have watched the videos know. But I think I've said it a few times in this video. I think I'm gonna probably go on like the low scoring game script side, and so probably gonna lean more on like defense and kicker constructions, just because I think like that's not what casuals or projections are going to build, and so I think that's probably where there's like a bit more edge, especially for a game where you don't everybody wants to watch a high scoring game, and so you want to build a lineup that matches what you want to happen. So yeah, I'm gonna probably play like Eagles defense, maybe even defense against opposing quarterback, just to be a little bit weird, and hope for some like pick sixes. But yeah,
I like it. I mentioned mine a little bit here at the start of the stream, but just jumping out to me all week as I've been kind of gearing up for this. It seems like Dallas Goedert is a little bit underpriced, especially compared to AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. I think he's going to be incredibly popular. I think traditional optimizers are going to jam him in. I think he's going to be a very comfortable guy to put in as that third, fourth, fifth guy into the lineup for a lot of people building by hand. I even think actually there's potentially some direct leverage opportunities with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith there. Hard to say that those guys are going to be unpopular, but I like the idea of being under or fading Dallas Goedert here, getting to a little bit more AJ Brown and Devontae Smith in the Eagles passing attack. So
just on that note, I think Kadarius Toney will be really popular too at his salary, like even less than Goddard. Goddard's at like 64. Tony's like 4,400 in the flex. So I think that he's like another easy name to click on. People have seen his explosiveness and think he has like upside when he does play.
I love it. We got Neil said SaberSim giving player takes. What a world. We had to do something special for the Super Bowl. It's fun. If you don't have like a hand in the dirt, a gritty player take for the Super Bowl, what are we even doing here, right? So anyway, it was fun. I don't see any other questions coming in. I hope you guys all appreciated this. Again, if you haven't gotten enough Super Bowl content yet already, I'd check this out, this video, any of the other videos on our YouTube channel as well. A lot of useful stuff in there for NFL Showdown building, the pro videos as well for our pro subscribers out there. We've done quite a bit of NFL Showdown, especially duplication focused content the past couple weeks. So definitely go and check that out. But otherwise, Andrew, Matt, it was fun doing this. Good luck this weekend. Good luck to everybody out there. And we will be back for another office hours on Monday.
See you, everybody.
Yeah.